Numbers you put out yesterday said that the GDP growth for 2021 was at a contraction of 7.3%. We've now done with April, we're done with May. From what you're picking up so far, what's your best sense of the impact that the second wave of the COVID pandemic has had on India's growth numbers in the first quarter of this year, sir? Welcome.
Rahul, before we talk about that, it is important to analyze the fourth quarter numbers. After the decline in the first quarter of 24.4%, there has been a progressive improvement with the gross value added in the fourth quarter being 3.6%. And emphasizing the gross value added because of the significant change in the accounting method, and that's, for the third and the fourth quarter, that is the right measure to look at. Especially if you look at also construction sector had grown by about 15%, and that's important because it provides jobs to the informal, in the informal sector, the urban poor. There was also significant increase in the gross fixed capital formation in the economy. So overall, up until March, the recovery had proceeded very well. Of course, the last 2 months, which is your April and May, have been impacted because of the second wave of the pandemic. And if you look at the high frequency indicators, many of the mobility indicators have declined in the month of April and May, but have started picking up again over the last 10 days. If you look at the e-way bills and the power sector, power demand, even on a year-to-year basis, so that any seasonality is accounted for, and we have to do doing an apples-to-apples comparison. Over the last 10 days, things have started picking up, which is reflecting the fact that the second wave is on its decline. And I think a pertinent point here is that if you look at the second wave, the pace of rise was very, very swift. At the same time, the pace of the decline has been equally swift as well. So I expect, therefore, that in this month, in today is the first day, of course, many of the states should go into easing of their restrictions. One important aspect that we must remember when we look at the impact on the economy is that these set of restrictions were more, driven by states, and therefore were asynchronous and were heterogeneous as well, especially in terms of the timing of the restrictions. And that is something that will, have basically its impact in, ensuring that the impact will not be as large as it was in the,
So in the first quarter of last year, the economy contracted by 24%, but that was also a total lockdown. Nobody really knew what COVID was about, and therefore everything just froze. This time, many of the supply chains which had earlier packed up have still been open. The wheels of the economy have been trudging along, even if they've not been galloping along. How would you compare the impact on the economy in the first quarter of this year with that of the first quarter of last year, which is when we had a total lockdown, very different from what we've seen this year?
So, Rahul, as you rightly pointed out, last year around this time, there was a lot of uncertainty because, how would the response, the health response be? Doctors, for instance, started using a lot of ventilation and then discovered that it was not required as much. So the economy has moved from a situation of unknown unknowns to known unknowns. There is certainly uncertainty now, but it's not as much as, around the last time. The other important point, and we've been looking at other countries that have had second waves as well, one of the key things that stands out is the economic impact of the second wave in other countries that have experienced second and third waves has not been as, has not manifested as much as the first wave, precisely because countries have learned to deal or work around the pandemic, and therefore the impact
No, but the
has
one
not
difference and the one variable in comparing India with some of the other countries which also witnessed a second wave is the speed of vaccination. Our population is much bigger, even though in sheer terms of the jabs that are being administered, the numbers rank well. But as a percentage of the population, the numbers are so low that when you compare with a country like the US or even the UK, our overall percentage of the population vaccinated, which is also very crucial in determining how fast the economy can start opening up, is at this moment at a much lower threshold than internationally. And therefore, it's not directly comparable what happened in the US, UK with a country like India at this moment?
That may be true, but I do want to point out, if you look at the percentage of the population that has received its first dose, and I do look at that aspect, because if you read a lot of the research that has come in epidemiology, there is a significant impact that is coming on average from the first dose itself. So if you look at, for instance, in the United States, across the various states, the impact of the first dose on actual death rates is significant. And India has vaccinated about 15% of the population has gotten the first dose. The second dose is about 5%, less than 5% or so. I'm talking about on average, and with the emphasis now on expanding supply. And I think this remains the most important. I have been mentioning this earlier as well. If you would have been following the monthly economic reports that the ministry puts out as well, the importance of vaccination has been emphasized repeatedly. So the acceleration in the progress of vaccination is by far most critical, because again, I go back to, if you look at the Q4 numbers, the fact that consumption grew at about 2.7% after having declined for 3 quarters. And if you look at the investment itself, gross fixed capital formation increasing by about 11 odd percent, 10.8%. That was because the fear of the pandemic had reduced significantly. And that is quite critical going forward as well. And therefore, vaccination and accelerating the progress of vaccination is very important. Here, I think the first dose, as I mentioned, will play its part, but we certainly have to actually go about doing the full vaccination program at a higher pace.
So we've